Good evening, everyone. My name is Rima Nashashidi, and I'm the founder and president of Global Hope 365. Thank you for coming tonight. First and foremost, I would like to thank St. Mark Presbyterian Church. They're an awesome church, for having us here and setting everything up for us. I would also like to introduce Crystal Martinez, who's with UNAOC. She's the secretary and she's our co-host.
Good evening, everyone. As Rima mentioned, my name is Crystal Martinez, and what I do is I serve on the board for the United Nations Association for the Orange County chapter. We are delighted to co-host with Global Hope 365 as we are addressing the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals at a local level. And so with that, we do is we partner with organizations like this one to raise awareness on various issues. If you would like to know more information about the type of events that we host and how to get involved, I will stay after the event to chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Crystal. I now would like to introduce Bobby Doberman, and she's with the St. Mark Peace and Justice Committee.
Get words out of my mouth. Again, I'm Bobby Doberman. I'm a member here of St. Mark, and I've worked for many years with our Peace and Justice Committee. And we care a lot about the issues of justice, particularly like this program that you're going to see tonight. And I just want to welcome everyone here and hope you'll be back again. Thank you.
Thank you, Bobby. I would also like to thank some of our sponsors, especially South County Labor, who's been paying, they're not here tonight, but they've been paying all our printing costs. And we thank Ray Cordova, we call him the Godfather, but South County Labor has been paying all our printing costs, and we thank them so much. I would also like to thank my buddy Gus Tuvia, who's sitting at that table, because I'm always complaining about what women and girls are going through, and he said, stop talking about it and just do it. And that's how Global Hope 365 was started. And I would also thank Daryl Sheets, our attorney, and also the one who keeps us afloat when the funds are low. So thank you so much. And Daryl's response to me is always, I have a daughter, and I want her to live in a safe society, a safe environment where there is no fear because of the greed of certain elements in our society, he said. So this is near and dear to my heart. I would like at this time the members of the board of Global Hope 365 who are here to stand up so people can see them. Is our treasurer, and Tamara Farrar is a board member. And we also couldn't have achieved what we have achieved without Anna Bryan, who's our communication director, and who decided to go back to Washington, D.C. So she's going to be our branch in Washington, D.C. when we need to do advocacy on the federal level. So thank you, Anna. I know you're watching the Facebook Live that we're streaming here. I would also like to thank all the volunteers who helped us get this set up. Thank you so much. And I would like at this time to introduce some of the people that we have at this event. I will start with Laura Altman. She's the District Director of Congressman Harvey Ruda's office. We're in the district. Is David McMurrin here? Yes, David McMurrin from the Orange County District Attorney's Office. He's a Deputy District Attorney. We thank the Orange County District Attorney's Office for being here and for their support. Christina Mujica, she's one of our speakers. She's a Juris Doctor candidate 2020, Chapman University Dale E. Fowler School of Law. Christina, raise your hand. If you like, we can save the applause to land. So we can, but it's up to you. I leave it up to you. Nora. We also have Tyler Campbell. on behalf of Supervisor Michelle Steele's office. They're happy that we are here in their district. Tyler? Nora Valenzuela, she's the chairwoman of the board of the World Affairs Council of Orange County. So if you'd like to join them, to join the World Affairs Council of Orange County, see Nora at the end. Dot Leach, where are you? Are you here yet? No, she's not. Libby Kreutzmann, I think I saw you come in. Yes, she's with Huntington Beach Huddle. Kelsey Wyman, another one of our speakers, is our Senior Deputy District Attorney from the Orange County District Attorney's Office. Faye Czar, and Faye is the Partnership Specialist, Los Angeles Regional Census Center. She's with the United States Census Bureau. Faye, where are you? Stand up so everyone. And I think Faye has brought in some literature, and it's at that table with regards to the census. If we have enough time at the end, I'll give you a few minutes to talk about it. All right. So what I would like to talk about tonight is that Global Hope 365, it's all about prevention of future victims happening of human trafficking and child marriage. There's a lot of organizations that help victims that have been identified in order to get them into the mainstream of society, but we're trying to prevent victims from happening in the first place because we need to get to the root cause of the problem, which is the demand and supply for human trafficking. And so we found education is the greatest human trafficking prevention tool. We're all about raising awareness to save lives. And our goal for 2020 is to raise funds and implement a pilot human trafficking awareness program in one of the schools in Orange County, and then we will raise more funds in order to implement that program in all schools of Orange County, just like the San Diego District Attorney did. She rolled out a human trafficking public awareness course in all public schools in San Diego. And we've been working very closely together with them so we can pilot a program here and then roll it out in all public schools. Our students are one of the highest risk populations, and traffickers are targeting them to become both victims and perpetrators. Why perpetrators? Because then they ask them to bring more victims into human trafficking. They send them to schools and they ask them to recruit other victims into human trafficking, and that's why they're both victims and perpetrators. They use coercion and manipulative tactics to get students and hires to recruit more victims. If kids are taught in school the red flags that traffickers use and that they are protected, and teachers and law enforcement know about human trafficking, they will not fall for this manipulative technique. So that's what we're all about. I do around 10 speaking engagements a month, and on March 20, I'm going to Olive Lutheran High School, and they wanted me to present to all 700 students in their schools. So we're doing it in schools, we're doing it to interfaith groups, at houses of worship. We go wherever we're invited. We're going to Huntington Beach Huddle, and we're to the League of Women Voters, so we're doing a lot of presentation. Kids of all ages and social classes are vulnerable, so you can't say only low income. No, they're targeting everybody. They don't discriminate. They just want victims. Because you'll hear about how much a trafficker who's working 2 girls or women makes a year. The cost of teaching one student through education is significantly less than the cost of providing services to a child who has been trafficked. In San Diego, the program that they roll out cost them around $2 million. They have 350,000 students. So if you do the math, that's around $5.70 a student. So we could do it here in Orange County. and we can find corporations and funders who will fund that program once we have the pilot program going. So, at this time, I would like to say thank you to all our speakers. We commend you for focusing your professional talents on ending the injustice of human trafficking. And to our audience, we commend you for spending your Friday here with us. The solution to end human trafficking requires a coordinated effort focusing on compassion for the victims and the prevention of future victims. And when you support our work, we welcome your donations via check or Venmo, and you can find us on Venmo at Global Hope 365. Donations of any amounts are appreciated. And we welcome your feedback to this event because that's the only way we can make it better and stronger. And please invite us to come and speak at your church, school, or organizations. And don't forget to drop your business card at the registration table. And also go to California Coalition to End Child Marriage and ask to join us and put in your name and child, and because we're planning to show the elected officials that we have a lot of support from their constituents. So at this time, I would like to start my presentation. So please follow us. We are on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Global Hope 365. And these are the hashtags. Please take a picture and use the hashtags all the time. You can start by using them here so we can create a stir about ending child marriage, ending human trafficking, gender equity, and end family violence. Our mission is advocating for the safety of women and girls through raising awareness, education, and empowerment. And our focus is to end those harmful practices against women and girls like child marriage, human trafficking, and child pity. Has anybody heard of child pity? Yes, Bob? What is it?
It has to do with practices that have been imposed on women, particularly in Nepal.
Yes.
Areas of the world where they have to go to they're thrown out, they cannot participate and stay in their home, and have to go to a tent or a outhouse and spend their time during their
Correct. Basically what Bob is saying is that in Nepal and some parts of India, if a woman or a girl has her period or just had a baby, and then they have to go to the cow shed with the animals. And the cow shed is a very small, as big as this table. It doesn't have a door because they use it for the animals, and they're in the Himalayas. And women and girls get beaten, bitten, raped, killed, or die from exposure to the elements. Our inaugural event was on January 8th last year. Bobby and Jerry were there. The day after that event, I received an email that another woman and her 2 sons died in a Chalpati hut because she lit a fire to get warm, and they died from smoke inhalations. So I have a friend who's a nurse in Nepal. She's trying to prevent this practice. Although the Supreme Court in Nepal has made it illegal, yet it's become ingrained in the culture, and they're still doing it, and enforcement is not as it should be. They don't have enough people to enforce it. And so I asked my friend Radha Fidel, what does it take for her to train 10 people, because she cannot do it on her own. So all 11 of them go and do and raise awareness in order to stop this practice, and she said $14,000. So we're trying to raise $14,000 so she can train the 10 people. So as you know, modern day slavery, there's around 40 million globally. 25 million of those are enforced labor, and 15 of them are enforced marriage, and 1 in every 4 victims is a child. And women and girls are 99% of the victims of the commercial sex industry. And UNICEF said child marriage is a fundamental violation of human rights. And the State Department issued a report in 2016 that said human rights, denounced child marriage as a human rights abuse in other countries. And what I'm saying is, what about our country? What about our kids? Let me see by a show of hands, how many people think child marriage is not legal in the US? Okay. Do you know how many states child marriage is legal in the US? 48 states.
Wow.
So child marriage is legal in 48 states. I didn't think child marriage was legal in the US until I got an email from Joy Adams from UNAOC that said child marriage, and it was an article written by Nicholas Kristof with the New York Times, who said child marriage is legal in 48 states. The only two states are, I'm blanking, New Jersey and Delaware. Delaware in May 2018 passed a legislation that said no child marriage under 18, no exception, followed by New Jersey in June 2018. Otherwise, it's still legal in 48 states. What we ask of you is call your elected official, your state elected officials, and tell them you would like to have a legislation passed that says no child marriage under 18, no exception. And as far as human trafficking, we talked about it. We have 25 million victims globally. It's a $150 billion industry, and it's the third and fastest growing crime industry. And please let everybody know that it's very easy to remember the national hotline, 1-888-373-7888, or text BEFREE to 233-733. Just a few statistics of human trafficking. Women and girls are 71% of all trafficked victims detected globally, and females represent 96% of the victims trafficked for sexual exploitation. And male victims represent 82% of being trafficked for organ removal. Yep. And guess who the #1 state in calls to the human trafficking hotline? It's California. And human sex trafficking up 842%, and California leads. They did a sting operation in January 2019, and they were able to save 50 victims. 14 of them are minors as early as 13 years old. They also did a sting in Anaheim, and they call it the John's sting. One of the people that they booked was a husband who just dropped his wife to get her nails done, and then he ended up trying to have sex, was what he thought turned out to be she's an undercover cop. So he was spending his time while his wife getting her nails done by buying sex from. So that's what we need, a shift in the, you should Google the John sting in Anaheim. So this is why we're going to take that human trafficking awareness program into all schools here, public, charter, and private schools. And the ask on human trafficking, as far as we're concerned, is, and the first item is from Sergeant Juan Reveles from the Orange County Human Trafficking Task Force. He said, we would like to see an increase of penalty on the human trafficker from felony to a violent felony, because felony, I think he said you're charged for 10 years, you're out in 5, they go back to doing the same thing. We're also going after the buyers of sex with victims of human trafficking, because we have to attack the demand side in order for the supply to be reduced organically. And it's right now, it's a misdemeanor, slap on the wrist, we want it to become a felony. And I would like their picture to be on the National Sex Offender Registry, and also we would like that program to be in all public schools. So that's our ask. And those cards in front of you, there's 7 cards in front of each one of you. Please put your name, address, and sign them, because then we're going to send one of each child marriage and human trafficking to your state assembly member, state senator, the governor, and one goes to the district attorney's office in Orange County. So to sum it all up, what we've accomplished in a year, we've hosted the first forum, Human Trafficking and Child Marriage Forum at UCI School of Law. We co-hosted it with the UCI Initiative to End Family Violence. We sent over 5,000 cards to elected officials. I conduct 10 to 15 speaking engagements a month. I've met with the Catholic Archdiocese. We've been meeting We met with the Muslim clerks, we're meeting with the Episcopalian Archdiocese, we had a meeting with Planned Parenthood. We're meeting with everybody to try to get a consensus, so when we pass a bill in California that says no child marriage under 18, it will pass this time, because Senator Jerry Hill from Northern California tried to pass that in 2017. He thought it was a no-brainer. Well, it was watered down so bad it wasn't worth the paper it was written on after they were done with it. And we're going to have a bike ride for Hope on March 28th. There's a flyer in front of each one of you. So if you're a cyclist or you would like to support us, just come in, register, bike ride for Hope.com. And Gus, wave your hand. He's the chair of that event. So again, sign those cards, call your elected officials, meet with them, tell us about the result, volunteer, invite us to speak, and hold a fundraiser. And that's it. Thank you. All right, thank you for being here again. And now we're going to go to Laura Oatman.
Today has been one of those days. My printer at work didn't work, and when I got home, I was going to print my talk at home, and my printer at home was broken. And now my computer is and the microphone's not going to stay up. You know, I might just have to do a song and dance or something. Hi, everybody. Thank you. First of all, thank you, Rima. Can we all just give Rima a round of applause? Proud to call her friend, and we are so blessed and fortunate to have her. She is a force of nature in this community. When this woman makes up her mind to do something, it happens. It's just amazing. She is such an incredible person. I think I met you maybe 3 years ago now, and I feel like our friendship has only deepened, and I really, really appreciate you. So thank you for everything you do. And good evening, everyone. And is this the first of your speakers series? It is, so we're all pretty excited to be here. I hope to see many more of these. Are you going to do these monthly or quarterly?
Every quarter.
Quarterly, yeah, I think this is great. Thank you, all of you, for being here on a cold, dark Friday night. I'm Laura Oatman. I'm the district director for Congressman Harley Ruda, who represents this beautiful city of Newport Beach, as well as 11 other cities, from Seal Beach down to Laguna Niguel. And thank you, Rima, for allowing me to give some very brief opening remarks, because I want to get to our main speakers here. You know, I don't know about you, I saw a phrase floating around on social media lately, and it really kind of rang true for me, but a few memes out there saying, January 2020 was the longest year of my life. Can anybody relate to that? Yeah, it just felt like a really long month. It felt like a year. Now, I know this talk is not supposed to be partisan, and I honestly love that. I honestly love the work that I am doing now in my official capacity, is that I am here, we are here, our office is here to serve everyone. And I think we can all agree that no matter what side of the political aisle you're on the last couple of weeks, it's been tough, it's been rough. And 2020 so far has started off, my never to be humble opinion, on the wrong foot. Between impeachment, threats of new potential war with Iran, a very divisive election year coming up, the incessant sort of partisan divide that haunts us. And yet, and not only that, what's going on the national level, but here locally, I think we all feel the weight of what's been happening. 12 days ago, we had the helicopter crash with Kobe Bryant, his daughter Gigi, and 7 other beautiful individuals. And then again, 6 days ago, we lost one of our fantastic nonprofits, Working Wardrobes, in a tragic fire. They lost everything. And I feel like this has really been just impacting our community and weighing heavy on our hearts. And so 2020 has been a very long year, and we're only 6 weeks in. That's why, though, When Rima asked me to come and just give some brief opening statements, I leapt at the opportunity because I really feel like now more than ever, we need to surround ourselves with people of goodwill, people with good hearts, good intentions, no matter the side of the political aisle, no matter our background, no matter our culture, our age. A lot of things divide us, and in these divisive times, we need to find everything that we can possibly do to unite us, and the unity has to come around good things. And Global Hope 365 is one of those beautiful points of light right now on the horizon in my life that I would love to see more people participate in, that we can all gather together, any opportunity that we find that is outside of the divisiveness and the chaos that's going on, obviously, in our world around us. I think we need to gather together and help support Rima in her mission. Because at the end of the day, we're really only as free or only as happy or only as safe as the ones among us that suffer the most, like these young women and young men who have had their lives tragically, basically taken away from them. These are dark times, no doubt, but as Dr. Martin Luther King once famously said, darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that. These are trying times, these can be dark times, but Rima's Global Hope 365 is a light in that darkness. And I believe all of you here tonight gathered on this cold, dark winter night, on a Friday night yet, all of you are also lights in that darkness. And I see you, I honor you, I thank you for being here. Thank you for keeping hope alive. Thank you for keeping my hope alive. Thank you.
Our next speaker, we're going to have all the speakers present, and then the Q&A will be at the end. So our next speaker is Cristina Mojica. Cristina is going to talk about her trip to Malta with the Jesuit refugee service, and to her it was a life-changing experience. She's going to talk about that and other things. So thank you, Cristina.
Sorry, we are having some technical difficulties. I agree, Laura, it's one of those days. So give me a second. Yes, please. Thank you, Rima, for inviting me to speak today. I'm honored to be here and honored to share this night with you. I know that this is a heavy topic, but I really strongly believe that this is worth talking about. Okay, so I will be giving an international perspective. My name is Cristina Mojica. I'm a third-year law student at Chapman Dale E. Bauer School of Law. So before we get into it, I just want to tell you a little bit about myself. I graduated from Rosary High School in Fullerton, California. I believe it's called Rosary Academy now. I went to UCLA, graduated with a bachelor's degree in sociology in 2014, and I started Chapman Law School in 2017, I believe. I'm going to be graduating in a couple months. I'm very excited because I'm ready to be part of the change in the world. So these are some of the reasons I think Rima invited me to speak here today. I do not consider myself an expert by any means in this field, but I have had some rich experiences in the last 3 years. So I worked at Human Rights Initiative, and this was in London. And this organization focuses on human trafficking. I worked at the Orange County District Attorney's Office in the Special Prosecutions Unit, and I helped with hate crimes. I also worked at the Betty and Wiley Aiken Family Protection Clinic. This clinic focused on survivors of domestic violence. This clinic is located in Anaheim, and Professor Wendy Seiden at Chapman University is is a wonderful director, and she's really passionate about that work. And I'm really blessed that I was able to work with her. I also worked at Jesuit Refugee Service in Malta. This was a refugee organization. We helped with pretty much anything under the sun: legal, mental, psychological, social services, anything. It was kind of a one-stop shop. And then most recently, I worked for Human Rights First, which is up in Los Angeles. And this one was also a refugee-focused organization. So I wanted to focus on Commonwealth Human Rights Initiative. This was a very impactful experience that I had in London. And as I explained, it's a nonpartisan, international, non-governmental organization. And they focused on human rights in the Commonwealth. So countries that I like to think that were previously colonized by Great Britain, and among other countries that were also added. And what we did there was we created a report that focused on human trafficking in those countries. And we wanted to see how they're handling human trafficking, what their laws are doing, what's the awareness around it. And then we came up with a roadmap. So suggestions, things that countries should focus on. And it was primarily an advocacy type of job. So the report focused on sustainable development goals. Does anyone know what that is? Has anyone heard of that? Okay, good. I thought no one would know. But they're actually very important. The United Nations came up with these goals. There's 17 goals across the board, just a bunch of different noble goals that they believe the world should achieve. And this particular goal that my organization focused on was SDG, Sustainable Development Goal 8.7. And this is focusing on modern slavery. We also called it contemporary slavery. And what that means is forced labor, human trafficking, forced marriage, child labor, and sexual exploitation. And like Rima shared earlier, the statistics are just terrible in this field. As of 2018, 40.3 million people in the world were estimated to be living under some form of contemporary slavery. So this is clearly a problem, and we wanted to help countries attack it. So what is the root cause of modern forms of slavery? It's greed. They're just like what Rima was saying, there's a demand and a supply. So the demand is there and people have money to spend and they want to spend it on this. And what we laid out in our report are several factors that contribute to the problem of modern slavery. So governance issues, lack of basic needs, so someone who is living in poverty isn't getting food regularly, isn't getting shelter, just very basic human needs. They're most at risk. There's also effects of conflict, inequality, groups of people in certain countries can sometimes be at the edges of society. We need to care about those marginalized people because they're most vulnerable to being brought into this world of human trafficking. And finally, we also said that climate change is also a factor. And if you think about it, it does affect the way people live, climate change, and that will definitely affect basic needs. So this is why we included this in factors. And then we came up with, I'm a little short on time, so I'm not going to read every single bullet point. And you can definitely read this in our report. I highly encourage it. But we do believe that we can meet this goal. We can eliminate modern forms of slavery. And doing so, we have to change social norms, attitudes, and behaviors. So create awareness around the problem. We need to improve laws and policy frameworks. We really need to look at our current structure and see how we can change it. And then finally, strengthen social and economic assets and safety nets. So coordinating a monitoring agency that can really look over, check in to see what we're doing, how far are we moving along in this process of improving the laws, and also just making sure that victims have support. So my next experience that I want to focus on is my most recent one in the summer, when I worked at the Jesuit Refugee Service in Malta. And this was an experience. I hadn't really heard of Malta, to be honest. I ignorantly thought it was a part of Italy, but it's actually a small country, island country, in the middle of the Mediterranean. And it's a hotspot for people to go through if they want to travel from Africa, the Middle East, Asia, and go into Europe. It's kind of just a jumping off point. So clearly JRS, that's what everyone calls it there, they had an immense need for people, volunteers. They cannot pay, so if you are interested in this field, I highly recommend, and you want to go to Malta, go to Europe, I highly recommend volunteering because they're pretty desperate right now. And Malta has been a safe haven for refugees. Geographically, it's small, but it does take on a lot, and I personally saw that this past summer. There was an unprecedented amount of boats that arrived coming from Libya, Egypt, Syria, and they all were arriving in Malta. Something about the laws that were currently in place, they were being diverted from Italy and Greece and going into Malta. So they were struggling to handle the flow of everything going there. And this is what refugees, asylum seekers thought they were going to see when they arrived in Malta. This is the life that I guess they heard via other people who had been through the process, people who had just crossed, or maybe smugglers who were trying to help them get there. This is the image that they thought they saw. And this is all the touristy parts of Malta. So I just want you to keep these images in mind while I'm going through the next couple of slides. So a typical process for an asylum seeker is they arrive there, they get there, and they stay in the initial holding cell for about 1 to 2 weeks. They can't leave the premises, but it's pretty short, so it shouldn't be that much of a problem. And then they're transferred to temporary housing for 1 to 2 months. They're allowed to leave the premises. During this time, they're encouraged to look for jobs and then eventually housing, longer-term housing, so that they can get out of that temporary housing center. And then, once they find a home, secure a job for them or their family, hopefully they will achieve refugee status. And under refugee status in Malta, they get pretty much all the same rights as the regular citizens of Malta. So it's a pretty sweet deal for them, and in theory, it shouldn't take too long. But this is what actually happens, and it was very hard to watch when I was there. When they first arrive in that initial holding center, they're there for 1 to 6 months. They're not allowed to leave. Their wallets are taken away, their money's taken away, ID, they have no phones. And it's really, if you have a connection to a guard or something, or they somehow get a hold of one of the attorneys at JRS, that they're able to make a phone call to somebody. And they really have no idea what they're doing there, how long they're going to be there, there's just no information. If they get to leave, then they're transferred to the temporary housing and they're there for 1 to 2 years. And the temporary housing is not a comfortable place to be. And then if they get out of that, then they move to low-income housing that's run down, not up to date, unhealthy conditions. And this is where the human trafficking, the racism, and the discrimination I saw kind of took place, because they're vulnerable. And oftentimes, even when they finally have established themselves in this low-income housing area, they're denied refugee status. In Malta, the Maltese Asylum Board gives them subsidiary protection, which is a lower form of refugee status, and it denies them just the rights that they really need, which is the right to travel in Europe, the right to own a house, the right to, sometimes, certain situations, the right to work. So they're stuck, and they're left to the option of human trafficking. So the next slide are the pictures that I took. I was not allowed to take them, so they're a little blurry. I was trying to sneak them. But this is what it looks like in Malta. And contrast that with this. It's really not a pretty sight. The picture on the right is the initial holding center. It gets extremely hot in Malta, up to 100 degrees during the summer, and it's very humid, and there's no air conditioning in there. The picture on the left is the temporary housing that people are supposed to be in for about 2 to 3 months, but end up staying for 1 to 2 years. That also does not have air conditioning, no access to laundry, they shower outside, and frankly, it's just inhumane. And surrounding that area outside, I wasn't able to get pictures of them, but that's where people pick up asylum seekers, refugees, to enter into a human trafficking realm. And I did meet a man who was a client of ours, and he was a victim of human trafficking even before he got to Malta. There's an insidious smuggling trade that's coming out of Libya. A lot of smugglers in Libya take advantage of people who are going through that country and are about to cross into Malta. And so what happens is they really extort them, they'll hold them there before they make the jump to Malta. And this one man, he was forced to work every day moving rocks. And he was raped every day, every night. And he was shaken. He could barely speak when he finally got to us. And the sad part was, when he finally got to Malta, the whole process started again, just a different perpetrator. And so, it's just not fair, and I really believe, I didn't know, when I was in Malta, I didn't know what to do. I told you where I grew up, and it was such a stark difference. I really didn't know how I could help, or if my help was even needed. But like Rima was saying, having compassion and just being aware of this issue does make a difference. And even though that this is the international perspective, and eventually we will get closer and closer with our speakers to the Orange County perspective, I believe the issues are the same. These are human beings, and every human being deserves respect. And we don't all need to live very lavish lives, but we deserve basic rights. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christina. And I know there's a lot of things she couldn't cover because I asked each speaker to speak only for 15 minutes. Only we wanted to give you headlines and do a general overview. But our next series, we're going to have someone from the Orange County District Attorney's Office, because 15 minutes is not going to cover what they need to cover, and they're going to have the full night speaking, so it's going to be quite educational. And I know Christina ran into a lot of discrimination herself, because I know she told me I never knew what discrimination is myself until I went to Malta. So we can ask her about that during the Q&A. At this time, I would like to ask the next speaker, Peggy Wong. Peggy, she is a city council member of Yorba, but she's a deputy attorney general, California deputy attorney general, and she will talk to us about what she's seeing the Senate bill she passed, she's going to give you her perspective as far as the state overview of what's human trafficking, what have been done, and what can you do to prevent it. So my friend, Peggy Luan.
I am so excited to see so many people here. Let me grab my notes up because I started working in the world of human trafficking and child sex abuse over 30 years ago. Can you believe that? I remember when I told my parents, so Mom, Dad, I'm thinking about going to Asia. I'm going to go to Taiwan. I don't speak Mandarin very well, but there's a need to help children and women who are victims of child abuse and domestic violence here in America, and they're immigrants, but they have no resources. Back in 1980s, we didn't have any resources for them, people who can speak to them in their language, as well as helping them with visas. So I decided, well, I'm going to go and learn the language. Oh, and by the way, Mom, I'm going to work in human trafficking. So imagine coming home and telling your parents that, and they looked at me funny and they said, what do you think you're doing? I said, yeah, I really believe in this. A little bit about this past 30 years of my journey to where I am, and I'm trying to condense 30 years into 15 minutes. I'm not really sure how successful I will be at that. But to give you a glimpse of what it looks like at the ground, and then I'll bring it up to what I do as a criminal prosecutor for the state of California. So in 1993, I was in Taiwan. I worked with the Catholic Church. A very generous donor donated a house just for women who were rescued from the sex trade. I specifically worked with children under the age of 14 that were sold into prostitution. So we rescued these girls who were sold by their parents generally, and we helped them. The difficult part about the rehabilitation services we were providing is usually we reunify children with their parents. But in this case, you can see that it is nearly impossible to reunify with their parents because they harbor so much hate for their parents, and it's understandable. I mean, how do you tell a child not to hate their parents when they know that the reason why they were involved in sex trade was because their parents put them in that position? So what we do, a lot of what we were doing was finding extended family members and then work on reunification. I was assigned specifically to work with a child that was sold into prostitution at the age of 5. She was sold off because her parents blamed her for the death of their only son. So from the age of 5 until the age of 9, she was working in a brothel, and she never went to school, could barely speak for herself. When I met her, she was a victim of PTSD, severe trauma, and very difficult to work with as a child. What it gives you a glimpse of is that, as previously stated, when you're dealing with children's issue, it's not a partisan issue, it's our issue, okay? We have to remember that for child welfare. What I did overseas during that year was I was very fortunate to have met the assistant to the Attorney General's in Taiwan, and she and I worked on a series of reform. And first things first was educating the families why it's so wrong to sell your child. For us, we think, well, why would we ever sell our children? But when families are desperate, when they're living in poverty, that those are the desperate things that they do. And so we had to educate them. We also had to work on starting, actually in Taiwan at that time, they didn't have any foster care system, they didn't have orphanages. So it was things like that. It was starting literally from scratch. Well, where can parents go? If I can no longer support my child, where can we help the family at least give up the child for adoption rather than taking the drastic steps that they took in? So those were some of the rehabilitative services that we did. in terms of trying to help the family. It's also helping them meet their needs, as you were saying, those critical needs when these families are trying to make those choices, and helping them access other social services that are available. A lot of time, amazingly, the services are there, but we're not doing a good job communicating with them, helping them access those services, those social services. So those were other things that we were doing as we were trying to end child prostitution in China. Coming back here, we have tremendous amounts of resources here in America. One of them being child welfare law. So in 1996, as part of the Welfare Reform Act, Congress had put child welfare as on the chopping block. And I can't tell you how many times I've bumped into senators and congressmen on both sides of the aisle that thought child welfare was related to welfare services. And we had to explain to them child welfare are services, fundings for programs that is ensuring the best interest of the child. And it's very important that we continue to make that program fully funded so that we can do what we need to do here at the ground level, and that is dealing with children in foster care, preventing child sex abuse, physical abuse, and human trafficking. Those are critical funding. So whenever you can have an opportunity to speak to your representative, talk to them about these important funding mechanisms, because that's what we're doing here locally. One of in the criminal elements, and starting in the 80s and 90s here in California, we started seeing mail order brides. This is before the age of internet. And so we came across, I was an intern at the time with the United States Attorney's Office in Sacramento. We came across a booklet. It was a red booklet. It's about this thick, about an inch thick, and was just pages of photographs of women around the world available for purchase. And so men would travel to those countries, meet up with their bride, bring them back to the United States, and this is how the trade started. And then when they're tired of those women, they sell them off to the next person. And that's happening here in America. So a lot of times we're talking about things overseas. There are things here in America. And this, so the case I worked on for the U.S. Attorney's Office actually happened in 1996. So the U.S. Attorney's Office in Sacramento actually busted one of the biggest mail order bride cases here in America across the U.S. There are thousands of cases like that at any given time. We just need to keep our eyes open for them. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the type of criminal cases I am dealing with, because it'll give you a glimpse of what we're battling with here at the local level, so that you know what you can do to, when you see it, you can stop it, be part of the solution in helping the kids. So I've been dealing with child abuse now, like I said, for 30 years. For a significant part of it, I was working directly with children who are victims of sex abuse in the juvenile court. Rima mentioned that about a couple of bills, I actually wrote 2 bills that were signed into law. One of them is to guarantee all children who enter the foster care system will have their own attorney. And the other one is that if their parents fail to reunify with their older sibling, then the younger sibling will be placed on permanent adoption track. And that's stemmed from several of my cases where the mom and the dad had over a dozen kids, and they were all lingering in the foster care system with no hopes of reunification. And here comes a brand new baby. And the system was built that then reunification services will be provided once again to the parents in the hopes of reunifying with the entire sibling group. So the bill I passed was to give the newborn an opportunity to have a better life, a permanent life. But in the foster care system, what was damaging that I started to see was these pimps, these criminal elements, standing around group homes They're near group homes, waiting for the teenage runaways. And they would literally kidnap them off the street. And then that's how they entered the sex trade. We have these pimps. So recently, about 2 years ago, I handled a criminal appeals case where we successfully prosecuted a pimp and the criminal syndicate that he was part of. That's exactly what happened to the 14-year-old victim and a 16-year-old victim. They were both runaways from our foster care, and they were in a group home. And the pimps literally about a block away from the group home, a car drove up and grabbed the first victim, the 14-year-old. The 16-year-old also reported the same story. She was running away from her foster home, and she was picked up right away within a few blocks. So we definitely have to do better in protecting our children by protecting these group homes and making sure that the criminal elements do not know where these group homes are located, and so that if the children decide to run away, which we do try very hard to prevent them from running away, they don't immediately become victims of sex trafficking. Another element that we are seeing, and this came up recently in a couple of my criminal cases that I've handled on appeal, have been peer recruiting. And this is happening quite a bit in high schools, and now, unfortunately, my last case is happening in the middle school. This tends to happen in impoverished community. All of a sudden, a girl shows up wearing the latest clothing, fashion brands, dressed really nicely, hair done, nails done, had the latest iPhone, AirPod, you name it, they've got it. And friends would become envious and ask them, how did you get that? How did you do this? You and I are from the same social economic level. How in the world did you get all that and I don't have it? And so the recruiter would say, well, I got a brand new job. I got an afternoon job. And they would make it sound really, really good. I'm a bookkeeper. I'm a runner. I am a receptionist. Everything, and they would tell them how great the life is, but they would also say, well, you have to be a star athlete. You got to be doing really well in school because, this is legitimate business. And so the cases I have come across, these girls would just beg their friends, please, can I have an interview? Can I just try out your job? And some of these criminal gangs and criminal syndicates are getting really smart. They actually would let them try out the job as an office job, all right? So they would go in and say, oh, yeah, that looked like a real job. And that's how we get them hooked. And they get recruited that way. And so we are trying really hard now at those levels to really deal with how do we deal with the social media influencer. I think that's one of the things that I think is going to be very hard as we try to deal with this subject matter is how do we deal in the age of social media and these influencers telling our kids you need to have these things across regardless of your social economic level, because this is what the criminal elements are using. They're saying, don't you want to be like the Kardashian? Don't you want to be like some celebrity, and using that as an opportunity to say, well, if you want to be just like them, if you want that, designer purse, if you want that, your makeup done this way, your hair done this way, you want to come and work for us. And this is something that I think for all of us, we need to start educating our kids. And I apologize, I'm going to walk off. But most importantly is to educate your kids about it, educate your friends' kids, and help us get the word out.
At this time, I would like to ask Kelsey Wyman, the Senior Deputy District Attorney, to come to the podium and give us her presentation.
Get our slides up, but thank you all very much for being here tonight. My name is Kelsey Wyman. I'm with the District
And we also have 3 very good investigators dedicated to our unit. And the way our office operates is the 5 of us handle our cases from filing all the way through jury trial or plea or resolution, whatever happens with the case. So the way we function is we are blessed to work very closely with the Orange County Human Trafficking Task Force that we have within our county. And that task force consists of multiple law enforcement agencies. I think Rima mentioned Sergeant Juan Reveles. He is the sergeant of the task force. They're based in Anaheim, but we have multiple different agencies that contribute to the task force, and other local law enforcement agencies also work very closely with us as well. Yes. And so that was just a quick overview, but the purpose of the task force is to ensure here that victims are identified and supported and perpetrators are held accountable. Obviously, that part falls with the district attorney's office, but part of what works well is the victim-centered approach that all agencies in our county are trained on and take. So luckily, social services and waymakers, which are our victim advocates, when the task force or other agencies contact victims out in the field, when they make an arrest and they have a victim, social services and waymakers are called right away. And that is kind of a shift that we've seen in law enforcement. Back in the day, before people had awareness about human trafficking, awareness that there's a pimp, a pander, or a trafficker behind the prostitute, there were often officers who just didn't know any better at the time who would arrest or treat the prostitute as not the victim, but the suspect. And since then, the task force has been very key in training all agencies about the victim-centered approach. So now, it's always contacting the victim out on scene and working backwards to find out what is the reason she's actually out there, who put her on the track, who put her in this motel room, what is actually going on. So social services and waymakers are very key in that kind of relationship. So one of the common things we get asked all of the time, and I apologize for the coloring, our slides didn't quite translate, but is there human trafficking in Orange County? That's always a question we get asked. It's one of the things we have to explain to jurors. People don't think of trafficking happening here. You have the beaches, Disneyland, right? That's the perception, but 100%, there's 5 of us in the unit, we have a lot of cases. Human trafficking happens here. The misconception, sort of, is people think of human trafficking as what they see on TV. We've seen the movie Taken. It's often thought of, and this does happen, but it's not typically what we see in Orange County. People think of victims being put in cages, smuggled, hidden in cars, taken across borders. But what is human trafficking according to the California Penal Code? That's a deprivation of liberty for the purpose of pimping and pandering. And just briefly to explain what pimping and pandering is when somebody is benefiting financially from the victim's prostitution earnings. Pandering is assisting that prostitute, procuring her for purposes of prostitution. So if anybody is depriving somebody of their liberty for the purpose of exploiting them commercially, that's human trafficking. And what is a deprivation of liberty? Just briefly, that deprivation can be by fraud, deceit, coercion, violence, duress, menace. So even if somebody is not letting a victim travel where she wants to go to, pick out the food she wants, restricting where she can travel or where she can sleep, when she can eat, who she can talk to, if she's allowed to speak to her family members, when she's allowed access to her cell phone, if that is even by threat of violence, that is human trafficking. So these are some of the statistics from the most recent human trafficking report that the task force put together. We had 415 victims assisted in the 2 years leading up to this 2019 report. 17% for national U.S. nationals. 302 were new victims identified, and 27% minors, 73% were adults. In the Orange County District Attorney's Office, our unit handles cases where there are both adult and minor victims. Some of the myths, and this leads to kind of the misconception behind what is really happening. People often have the thought that the victims chose to actively be prostitutes, but in reality, there's no juvenile child who dreams of becoming a prostitute. That's just not right. What the reality is oftentimes, I think each speaker said this tonight, which should kind of ring true to what's happening. Vulnerable victims are targeted. Pimps are smart. They know what they're doing to make money. They are often targeting the most vulnerable victims that they can find. I think Peggy talked about certain victims who are running away from their care homes. And that is something we see here in Orange County. Pimps, traffickers, looking for vulnerable victims in different locations, including online. A lot of our cases, some of our cases are brought to us by detectives who are acting undercover. Acting undercover, keeping a different profile online, and the amount of traffickers, pimps, panders who reach out to that undercover profile where they're posing as an undercover minor victim, it's astounding. They're frequently getting message upon message upon message, recruiting these undercover, or who they believe to be an undercover victim, into their stable, is what they call it. A stable where that person is the king or the daddy. And that is the type of manipulation we see regularly here in our county. So methodology of the trafficker, just like I said, targeting the most vulnerable of victims. And I think all the speakers talked about using victims to recruit other victims. And that we see all the time. What they call the way stable works, there's a term, it's called the game or the life. That is what pimps and traffickers refer to as the lifestyle or that subculture of pimping and pandering. And the terminology and the language used by pimps taught to the victims, it's all consistent, it's all very different. Certain terms are given very different meanings in that subculture. People ask, is there trafficking in Orange County? We have an international track. And a track or a blade is an area where victims are brought to walk. And that's street walking prostitution. When I joined the unit, I had the opportunity to go on what's called a ride-along, where you go with officers who are undercover in the area. And the blade of the track here in Orange County, is right here in Santa Ana, on Harbor and Hazard, pretty close to Disneyland. It's one of our most popular locations in the county. And you would never know if you're just a visitor going to Disneyland, staying in one of those hotels. You would never know that on that same street is that track. But when I went on the ride-along with Santa Ana, I knew what I was going to see. I thought I did at least, and it was completely unbelievable. The prostitution activity has moved from those main streets into the residential neighborhood, right there, right off of the track. And you see these homes, you see slides, balls, things that kids play with, toys out front, but at nighttime, there are so many victims that we were doing loops, me and the undercover officer, and there would be different victims each time we turned the block. And the other surprising thing was the traffic. It was 2 a.m. Why is there traffic in a residential neighborhood? It was the purchasers, the Johns, the people who are the reason that human trafficking even exists. somebody mentioned supply and demand, and that's it's a true and crass way of looking at it, but it's completely true. We would not have this type of supply if it weren't for the demand. And people ask, why Orange County? Why is there trafficking here? It is a relatively affluent county. There's money here, and there's interest here. That's why there's a national track. And our unit has seen cases not just from the track in Santa Ana, although that is one of the main places we get cases from, but due to the internet, all the different online forums where these pimps, these traffickers are recruiting from, we get cases from all over the county. I've handled cases from Newport Coast even. You would never suspect that, really, until you realize that victims are brought to wherever there is a demand. And I think our audio isn't quite working, but what this is, it's a slide of an interview that was taken by some of the Anaheim detectives of somebody who is a pimp, and he was pretty open with them. He had an honest conversation with them, and they asked him, why? Who are you targeting, really? And what he tells them, he says, I'm not joking around, but if you're a father, if you have children, stay in their lives. It's the first thing he tells them. He says, we target young girls who aren't used to having that type of support, don't have a strong male figure in their life, and we go after them because they are looking for somebody like us. Some of the text messages we read regularly in our police reports when they're conversing with the victim prostitute, they're often pitching themselves as somebody who can make the girl money, who can make them have friends, have support, and ultimately give them a better support system, that kind of lifestyle. We know that's not true, but if you're a vulnerable victim, she might not realize exactly what is happening. So we've seen recruitment at shelters, social media is big, shopping malls, concerts, group home, the foster care system, and isolation is one of the tactics that traffickers use. And isolation doesn't necessarily mean locking somebody in a motel room, but separating victims from their family members, that's a tactic commonly used. Taking control of her cell phone, not letting her talk to her friends, not taking her home to her family, and saying, I'm the person you report to. I'm the only person you report to. That's one of the control and isolation tactics that we see. So like I mentioned, the game or the life, how do we keep control? All of the money, and this is surprising sometimes to people. They think maybe the victim prostitute gets 50-50, or she might get at least a cut of the earnings. Consistently across the board in all of our cases, all of the money goes to the pimp or the trafficker. The victim prostitute is typically responsible for a quota. And it depends on the pimp or the stable or what their rules are, but if somebody is put out on the track, she will not be allowed to be picked up to come to the hotel room to get clean clothes, food, whatever it might be, until she has earned her quota that evening. All of the money is collected by the pimp. Oftentimes, one of the control tactics we see is a set amount of condoms will be provided to the victim, and each one is worth whatever it is, $100. She can't come in until she earns $100 per condom, and he knows exactly how much because he's counting. These are just some of the ways pimps keep control of their victims. And punishment, that's standard. There are different types of pimps. One is referred to as a guerrilla pimp, and that is somebody who uses violence across the board. There's also, and this is arguably more scary, the Romeo type pimp. And that is somebody who really knows how to prey on vulnerabilities. That is somebody who leads victims to believe he loves them. He's her boyfriend. They're just dating. And oftentimes, that starts that way and turns into something else, which is trafficking. So this is how society views pimps. This is what the movies, the books, the TV tells us. But these are real faces of pimps that have been convicted here in Orange County. It could be any person, and they're not always necessarily recognizable. And about the Johns, again, I'm sorry, our PowerPoint didn't quite translate, but Johns are a term used to refer to as, or that we use to refer to sex purchasers. A John is somebody who is out there exchanging sex for money. And when we prosecute Johns, it's under the same penal code section as prostitution. So Johns are guilty of soliciting prostitution or agreeing to engage in prostitution. But that is where a lot of the focus lies because, again, reducing demand will hopefully reduce the amount of trafficking and the amount of victims that are being victimized in our county. So again, thank you all very much for being here tonight. I will stay after because I know we're going kind of fast. If anybody has any questions about our office, how our unit works, both David and I will be here after. So thank you very much and take care.
Thank you so much, Kelsey. Whenever I go and do speaking engagements, what I hear all the time is, what? People have no clue that this is happening in our society. They had no clue, just like I did, that child marriage was legal in the United States. Their myth of human trafficking was all these foreign women coming into the U.S. and that the victims are not U.S. citizens. You've heard from the experts here about the reality and why we need that human trafficking awareness course in all public schools, because we need to prevent future victims from happening. That's the only way we could do it. And so I hope you support us and get us to speak to as many people as possible until we get that program in all schools. I'll give you one example that I heard about. I was having dinner with friends, and then we'll go to the Q&A. Have your questions ready. A friend said that his friend's daughter was in school, and her friend said, my dad and I will take you home. She said, let me call my parents. And they said, no, by the time you call them, we'll already be home. It turned out, and she disappeared for 6 months after that. It turned out that dad was not really her dad. And it just happened that the father was very wealthy. Law enforcement unfortunately couldn't find his child, so he hired private investigators. They found her after 6 months. She's already been raped and put into sex trafficking. So now she has PTSD and they're going through that rehab process. So we need to raise awareness again and save lives. So, and usually my presentation is 40 minutes.